Hello, beautiful people. My name is Lwanele Khasu. I'm a clinical psychologist, and welcome to Learn to Heal. Welcome to all the new people that have joined us. Welcome to this community of people that are absolutely dedicated to healing. We understand that sometimes we get the unfortunate experiences of being hurt, the unfortunate experiences of loss, of grief, of trauma, and all kinds of things. But it really is our responsibility for us to get better, for us to have healthy lives, for us to thrive, and for us to really just flourish in our lives. So we are a community of people that are thriving for that. We're trying to get ourselves to the best possible place for ourselves first, for our relationships, for our families, for our work. We want to be able to show up in the best way that we can in all of the different areas of our lives. So welcome to the community. If you are new, and you are welcome to leave a comment, leave some questions that you'd like us to think about. Depending on where you're listening to this, to this podcast, you're absolutely welcome to also just kind of leave some comments in terms of what would you like to hear about next? What questions do you have? And I really take those into consideration for the next podcasts that I actually engage in. So welcome and enjoy. So today I wanted to talk about being enough, right? And I did a podcast with Bumi a couple of weeks ago, and I think one of the things that people kept DMing me about is idea of being enough, because one of the things that I said in that podcast, that sometimes we really don't define for ourselves what enough looks like, and therefore we end up chasing this idea of being enough, whether we're looking at someone else who looks like they have enough and we're trying to chase that picture that person has or the life that person has, and it leaves us feeling really unfulfilled. It leaves us feeling like we are not good enough, like the work that we've done is not sufficient, it's not enough, we haven't done anything significant with our lives. And how invalidating is that? Right? It's so invalidating knowing that you wake up every single morning to go to work, to run your business, to take care of your children, to really make the best that you can with what you've been given. And at the end of it, it feels like all of that is futile. So I wanted to shoot this this podcast and really just talk about you're enough. You are enough. But if you haven't connected with that feeling, it won't feel like you are. If you haven't connected with what do you feel like you're missing in your life, you won't connect with that. If you haven't defined what enough looks like for you, you won't connect with that. But also at the same time, if you haven't accepted your life for where it is, then you won't connect with that. I wanted to start with what generally robs us of just internalizing this feeling of being enough, internalizing this knowledge that we're enough. And I think one of the things that actually robs us of that, and yes, I'm a psychologist, I will always go back into our childhood, but it is our childhood sometimes that robs us of that feeling. And you may be asking yourself, in what way? So when we grow up as children, right, that the environment we grow up in, the words that are said to us, the ways that in which we are acknowledged and validated actually creates what we call it our sense of self, right? So it's being told that, oh, you're so good at this, oh, you're so bad at this, oh, you're not good enough, oh, you're so pretty, oh, you're not pretty. It's those words that you hear from a really young age that actually make you build up a sense of self. The relationships you have with your primary caregivers, whoever they are, whether it's your mom, your dad, your grandmother, your grandfather, your aunt, whoever was the person you first were projecting to. Because when we grow up and we're young, we don't know how to act. We learn how to act by seeing other people act. We learn how to act by seeing our parental figures act, right? So the way that you related with those primary caregivers gives us a sense of understanding how are you going to react in your future relationships or your current relationships if you're an adult, because those are the patterns that either made you feel safe or made you feel seen, right? Maybe you had a really loving mom who was quite sensitive to your emotions, sensitive to your needs, helped you create an emotional vocabulary to understand things. You came back from school, you were upset about something, and then she was able to kind of help you say, oh, you're feeling disappointed that you didn't get the marks that you wanted. And from that, you learned the language of being able to describe yourself and your emotions. It happens the other way too, that when you haven't had a sense of that, you come back from school, you didn't get the marks that you wanted, and you get dismissed, and you get this feeling of, the response that, it doesn't matter anyway, 50% is fine. Yes, 50% is fine, but what you were upset about is the fact that you didn't get what you had wanted for yourself. So that dismissal and that constant dismissal then creates a pattern within you that feeds your sense of self, or what you view as your sense of self, right? So this idea of, am I enough, starts from there. It's this feeling of, did I feel acknowledged? Did I feel seen? Did I feel validated when I spoke to the people around me? Did I feel like what I was saying mattered? And if we feel like we haven't had that, in our fullest, then it starts planting seeds in our psyche that maybe I'm not good enough until I've made, the A team in soccer. Maybe I'm not good enough until I've actually passed with 90%, because I've seen when I pass with 90%, my dad gets so excited, he brags about me. So the thing that then fuels your enoughness becomes passing, right? It becomes that mark. It becomes that validation that comes from that particular person. So that really kind of sits as the first layer of where we get our sense of being enough. It doesn't mean that if you had a terrible childhood, or if you weren't validated or affirmed in your childhood, that it's over, right? It's not over, which is why we're having these conversations, because in adulthood, you can do what we call reparenting. It's a tough thing because it means you give to yourself what you feel like you hadn't received in your childhood years, right? You give yourself a sense of nurturance. You listen to yourself. You don't dismiss yourself. The people around you that try to love you, don't dismiss them, because we like doing this thing, right? When a person says, oh, what would you like to eat? And you say, oh, don't worry about me, I'll figure myself out. You sort yourself. And in those ways and in those conversations, we are constantly dismissing ourselves and our needs to the people that are doing life with us. So much so that sometimes they learn that, oh, I shouldn't worry about Lwanele, she's fine, right? And even when you do want them to worry about you, they don't, because you constantly said, don't worry about me, sort yourself out. Sometimes even if we can sort ourselves out, we need to be able to just calm down and allow the people around us to actually take care of us and to give us that nurturance and that love, right? So even if you didn't have the greatest of childhoods, you can still come up and still define that enoughness for yourself, but it requires a little bit more work. So that's the first layer, right? It's a fundamental layer, but it is the first layer of where would you have gotten this affirmation, and where would you have gotten the sense of, I'm good enough and I can claim it for myself. The other thing though, the other layer that happens is that as we then grow up, our parents could have done the best that they could, but then we get into social circles and communities with people that then don't see us, that start valuing another thing that's not what we are or who we are. Right? So when we are in those spaces, it could be either as a teenager or in varsity or even in adulthood, but when you are around people that seem to value one thing above the other, it can rob us of that sense of, I am good enough as I am, as unique as I am. So if you're thinking to yourself and you want to trace for yourself, where does this feeling of not being enough come from for me? You have to kind of go back to say, okay, was it in my childhood, or did I start hanging around with people that actually affirmed this part of me that I'm not good enough, where they didn't invite me to some event sometimes, but they would invite other people. Like they would say, I'm going to come pick you up, and then they don't pick you up. Or you would see on your social media that, oh, they actually went out, but they didn't invite me. Why didn't they invite me? So all of these senses of being isolated and excluded sometimes can create that sense of, oh, perhaps there are closer friends to them than me. Maybe I don't have what they're requiring for a healthy relationship or a healthy friendship. And that can invalidate that part for us. And then the other part of it that can happen is, of course, societal, the general system. So you can either be working in a corporate and you feel like, oh, people like me don't belong here. I don't know how to dress like this. The references that they're talking about of the music, I don't understand. The references of things like that. Imposter syndrome can sometimes rob you of the sense of, I am not enough. I'm not good enough for this particular environment. Because you're seeing yourself and you're comparing yourself to the people around you, right? And you're comparing yourself to the system that exists that you're living in, and you're like, but I don't look like this picture, and therefore I probably am not good enough for this environment, right? And there's many other places that could trigger this for us. I'm giving you a few examples so that you can really just sift through your mind and think about, where does this come from for me? When did I start feeling this way, that I'm not enough, that what I bring to the table is not enough, that I have to constantly compensate to prove my worth and my value? Because the reason why this is so important is that it actually comes up in different areas of our lives. You might be in a relationship right now, whether a romantic relationship or with your friends or even with your family, where you're feeling like, I am constantly overcompensating. I don't have money, but I spend so much of my money on my brothers and my sisters' things, and they'll buy frivolous things, and I actually don't even have money to buy myself clothes. And you have to ask yourself, where does this lack of boundary come from for me? Because perhaps it comes from a seed that exists within your heart, where you're thinking to yourself, maybe if I buy them these things, maybe if I'm the ideal daughter or the ideal son, I'm actually going to get that love and that affirmation that I've been looking for from these people. So that feeling of not being enough can lead us to being overcompensators, to being people pleasers, to being people who have no boundaries, and people who just constantly undervalue and undermine who we are, where we are overvaluing other people's problems and undermining our own problems. You'll see this sometimes with how you'll show up. Maybe a person says to you, oh, I actually need you to Uber me somewhere, and you only, and you didn't have Uber, and then now you have to maybe you're running somewhere, you're like, oh, now you're going to be late because you're trying to download Uber on your phone so that you can Uber this person to some other place, and then you end up being late for your engagement that you needed to go to. These are small events, but also they build up, and they can also build up into bigger things. You can see it in the everyday, sacrificing yourself to getting to a place on time because you're trying to help a person. But you're thinking about it like, oh, but you could have downloaded this Uber yourself. Oh, but you could have done this yourself. You could have done this. But what you did is that you overvalued their problems and undermined yours. And you thought, oh, I'm going to be fine. Let me help them with this other thing that they need done. Right? And the thing about it is that there's nothing wrong with helping. Helping is a good thing. We live in communities, and you need to be there for each other. But there's also needs to be an assessment of, am I constantly helping people who can't show up for me? Am I constantly in this place where I am invalidating myself. And even when my family or my friends are saying, oh no, let's do this for you, and I keep saying no because I just don't feel intrinsically worthy of some of the help that they want to give to me. Because this can go deep and deep and deep into a sense of feeling shame when you're being helped, a sense of guilt when you're eating Nando's and you are wondering to yourself, oh, I wonder what they're eating at home, even though you know you've bought groceries for the month, but you're just that eating that sushi makes you feel so guilty that you actually deny yourself of what you need and what you can afford just because you're thinking about, oh, I wonder if they're eating, they're not eating sushi at home. I know I bought groceries, I know I bought food for them, but just this fact that I'm doing this makes me feel like I'm not worthy of it, or I shouldn't be doing it. Or why am I booking a holiday? Why am I going away when the people in my family or in my friends can't afford to do that, when my partner is going through, a restructured work? It's like this idea of denying yourself, even though you know that doing the one thing doesn't translate into you helping the other person with the other thing. But there's a sense of self-denial that comes in because you don't think you're worthy in that moment, or you want to self-sacrifice for other people around you. Like I said, don't get me wrong, helping is a good thing, but sometimes you have to understand, am I helping from a place of obligation and guilt, or am I actually doing it from a place of pure heart and I want to help you and I want to do this? But either way, if you're not feeling like you're good enough for stuff, if you're not feeling enough, you are not going to give yourself the things that your heart desires and even the things that you're working so hard for. Right, so you're probably thinking at this point, okay, I get the picture, it's bleak, it's not nice, so what do I do about it? The first thing I will always say about most things is that you have to be aware. You have to be self-aware and understand, where do I feel like I have a gap? Where do I feel like I'm not good enough? Where do I feel like I am less than in my life? Is it a particular area of my life? Is it overall my entire life? Where do I generally feel this feeling? And then second thing, you have to then go back and reflect and say, where does this come from me? What's the root of this thing, so that you can uproot it? And I think the other thing that then becomes really important is then you have to define and say, what does it look like to be enough? So if you're saying, I'm not good enough because I don't have enough, right? Then you have to define, what does having enough look like? Okay, it's having this, it's having this, it's having this. So then you know, when you're working hard towards a tangible goal that you can actually measure and that you can reach. Because when we are working towards an enoughness of goal, we never reach it, because the goalpost will always keep on moving, but also at the same time, never mind the goalposts keeping on moving, you just never feel like that's enough, because the more you grow is the more you desire for yourself. So define those goals, put a measuring scale in place of what does my enough look like. And then the last step will be, what is the evidence you have that you haven't achieved that, and what is the evidence you have that you've actually achieved that? Because saying affirmations like, I'm enough, I'm good enough, I can do it, those can only go so far until you actually realize that you're lying to yourself and you don't connect to the words that you're saying. But looking at the evidence of what you have defined as enough and verse with what you have done and been able to complete is going to give you a firm realization and a firm evidence that I am enough, because this is my definition and this is what I've also been able to do. Of course, we want to have better futures, we want to dream big, we want to have all kinds of fantasies, and that's important, but it's also important to acknowledge the present, to live in the present, and to acknowledge yourself in everything that you've done. And above everything that I've said, that you know, of the things that you have actually done, you always need to remember you are a unique person. You are your own individual. The world needs you, not a clone of your friend, not a clone of your colleague. You, the one and only person that can authentically and genuinely be yourself, right? You need that. You need to connect with yourself. If you feel like you don't know yourself, get to know yourself, get to know your value, get to know your worth. Think about things in relationships like, oh, what value do my friends get out of me? Because answering those questions helps you not people please and overcompensate and constantly do things like buying gifts because you think you're not doing enough, dropping your entire life because you think you're not doing enough. Just understanding the value of yourself is going to help you go a long way in understanding that enoughness and be able to show up in spaces and relationships with that in mind. I hope this was really helpful. If you want to, you can re-listen to it and really understand some of the things that I've spoken about. But take care of yourself, acknowledge yourself, find the evidence that you are doing well. And if you know you're not doing well, then you want to do better, it's okay. Write those goals down so you know exactly what you're working towards. But do not undermine yourself just because you are overvaluing what other people have. Okay, cheers. Bye.